If you ache for truth, goodness, and beauty, if you're hungry for a Christianity with substance and strength, if you long for a faith that's big and bold and biblical and all about Jesus Christ, if you're inspired by the idea of one church that has spanned 20 centuries, 24 time zones, and 2 hemispheres, enfolding every race, nation, and language, then you're considering Catholicism.
Ed,
Yeah.
I'm going to give you a number.
Okay.
And I want you to remember this number because this number is the critical number for this episode.
All right.
2.3.
Okay.
2.3.
2.3. I got it.
In fact, I thought about maybe even like working 2.3 into the title of the episode because I found that if you do intriguing titles, and so I was thinking about the magic number is 2.3. But the good news is, okay, I'm going to give you another number.
Okay.
3.5.
Okay.
So 2.3 is the target number, okay? Like the minimum target number.
Right.
But you and I collectively, our score is 3.5. So we are...
I see where you're going with this, and I was just trying to calculate it. So I didn't get there yet.
Yeah, you do math in public.
Yeah.
But we're scoring collectively 3.5.
Yeah, there we go.
So
Yeah.
we are not the problem, at least collectively within our group.
Right.
So what are we talking about here? We're talking about something that I've wanted to talk about for a really long time. And in the last episode, we had an email from a listener named Eric who was talking about contraception and the church's teaching on that and how it affected the size of families. And he was arguing that the church's stance on contraception, barring artificial contraception, and the church saying that you have to have large families, drove people out of the Catholic Church, and it's a barrier to people coming in. And that obviously then artificial contraception, which has allowed people to limit the number of children they have, would be a good thing. That's right. He didn't quite say that, but that's what he's implying. So that led me to thinking, wow, this is a great opportunity to talk about something that I've wanted to talk about for a really long time because I don't think a lot of people understand it. Okay?
Okay.
And that is demographic collapse. Okay?
Yeah.
So we grew up hearing about the population bomb.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And today I want to dive into a crisis that nobody saw coming because I believe we've been brainwashed. That's exactly the right word, brainwashed to fear the wrong thing. So for decades, 50, 60, 70 years, we were told that overpopulation, too many people, was going to doom society. It turns out it's the opposite.
Yeah.
We're disappearing. The population bomb is a population implosion. Okay? So here's the context. Since the 1960s, there was a book, The Population Bomb. That was the title of the book.
Yep.
And everybody swallowed this big time. Schools, media, government sold us this lie that there were too many people in the world and that was going to starve the world. It was going to burn the forests. It was going to choke the planet. In the 1990s, I saw an interesting thing on X the other day, a little clip or something, thread somebody had, where they were talking about this show. It's like a really dumb children's TV cartoon thing called Captain Planet. So in the 1990s.
Yeah, no, nothing about
Well,
it.
I know because my kids were of an age in the 1990s where they could have watched that, but I could tell that it was, I was going to say a word, that it was stupid, that it was just completely stupid, and I wouldn't let them watch it. But this whole thing, Captain Planet, was this cartoon, and the whole gist of the thing was anti-human. There's too many people. We have to cull the herd. We have to reduce the number of people to save the planet. We have to have small families. We have to have one. If you're going to have a child, you're allowed to maybe have at most one kid. And if we do all this, it's going to have this, we have this bright future. There's going to be rainforests and critters running everywhere. And the number of humans will be small, but we'll have this like shiny techno future. Right. But it was all anti-human from the jump. Okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
So here's the thesis for this conversation that I want to have here. What developed nations now are discovering, 60 years after this population bomb myth really hit, is developed nations are collapsing, and collapsing demographically. The collapse is the strongest word. I'm going to show you some. I'm going to explain this here and then get your reaction. And I want to contrast it here with Catholic teaching, because Catholic teaching on the family, on life, on the purpose of life, might be the only thing that can save us or could have saved us. So let me explain this 2.3 number. Okay, you still with me here?
Yep.
Okay. And this is going to shock people who haven't thought about this, because again, we've been brainwashed for 60 years into this. It's been so built into your programming. Let's talk about replacement rate. Okay? Replacement rate basics. There's simple math here, and it's brutal math, that there is a number of children that each person has to produce in order to replace themselves.
Right.
Okay?
Yep.
So if you have one man and one woman, okay, that one man and one woman have to produce 2.3 kids in order to keep the population steady. Now, why 2.3? Because some children die.
You're factoring in for disease and other
You're factoring
accidents
in for child mortality, and the fact that some children aren't going to grow up to reproduce themselves.
Or be able to.
Right? If one man and one woman produce 2 kids, so 2 people create 2 more people.
Right.
But those 2 children, one of them dies or one of them grows up and for whatever reason doesn't have kids of their own, then you haven't replaced the population.
It pulls the curve down.
Pulls the curve down. So if you drop below that, if you get below 2.3, especially if you get below 2, you're now shrinking the population. So let's say you have generation number 1.
Right.
You have 2 people. Generation number 2 only has, say, 1.5. We can't have half a person. So like for averages, for large groups, right? So if you have 1,000 people, and 1,000 people only produce 700 people, and then those 700 people only produce 400 people, and those 400 people only produce 200 people. Within 3 or 4 or 5 generations, you went from 1,000 people to 200. And this is where the population bomb myth comes in. That's a good thing because we have too many people, but it doesn't really work that way. Okay? So here's some stats to hopefully wake people up. In the United States, the current birth rate, okay, is 1.66. That is the...
Oh, man.
Okay, what that is per woman or per couple, right? So what you have is a fertility rate of 1.66. Japan is 1.26. So Japan right now is losing 600,000 people a year.
Whoa.
Okay? That is, I have a stat here that says that is, if you take the city of Baltimore, they're losing 1.5 Baltimores a year in Japan.
Wow.
And you can say, well, there's a lot of people in Japan, and it's as good as Japan shrinks because it's too crowded. You go, but we're going to get into what happens when you have less children. But it gets worse. Italy, 1.24. 1.24. Whole villages in Italy are collapsing. My wife and I have half seriously talked about, if you can go on the web, you can go on the internet, and you can find all of these, like this real estate in Italy that you can go buy. Like we were looking a couple of weeks ago, there was something that popped up and it was like 50 acres of a 50-acre farm in the Italian countryside with an old 500-year-old farmhouse and a little church chapel on it and everything else. And you could buy it for $100,000.
Wow.
Like, we should just like move to Italy and do that. And there's villages in Italy, like where the whole village, beautiful kind of picturesque villages, and they're empty. And the Italian governments will give houses to anybody who will move there and promise to have kids.
Right.
But wait, it gets worse. South Korea, super shiny, developed technoculture, right? You know, current reproductive rate is 0.78.
Ooh.
It's the lowest globally. So by 2070, which is what?
35 years?
45 years.
45 years.
40 years around. Within 1 or 2 generations, South Korea will have half the number of people it does today.
Right.
It'll go from 51 million to 26 million. And you go, well, that's good. There won't be as many Koreans. And you go, but we'll get to what the impacts of that are when you have half the number of people in your cities. Europe in general is 1.5 across Europe. Germany, 1.58. Spain, 1.19. Okay? And here's the deal. What are you going to do? You look at something like Spain, unless they have, in Germany, Europe, unless they have mass immigration, which is what they're doing. Someone says, why are they allowing mass immigration from Africa and Central Asia and the Middle East into Europe? Because they'll be gone in a century unless they get people.
Yeah.
So if you run the math, right? Suppose you have a fertility rate of 1.5, which is Europe's average. You have 4 couples, 8 people, right? Those 8 people have 6 kids, so generation 1 is 8 couples, generation 2 is 3 couples.
75%.
Okay? Those 3 couples, those 6 kids have, next generation is only 4 kids, which is 2 couples. Okay? Then the next generation has 3 kids, which is 1 couple. So what it says is, if in a century, over 3 or 4 or 5 generations, you only have 1 kid. The 8 people, only, and when you look at like great-grandchildren, there's only 1. 8 people produced 1. Okay, take South Korea, which is currently at 0.78. Just call it 1 to make the math easier. 4 couples go to 2 couples, go to 1 couple, go to 1 kid. That's an inverted pyramid. Instead, the population bomb becomes an inverted pyramid at the top. Okay? And here's where you go, oh, why do you care? There's too many people on the planet. Okay, so you're going to have 1 child supporting 4 grandparents.
Yeah. Literally.
Yeah, like pension programs, Social Security, tax base. Okay? 1 kid supports 4 grandparents and 8 great-grandparents. Pensions, healthcare, done. Gone. And anybody who says, why are all of these countries in Europe and whatever, why are they importing all these immigrants? Because if you don't, in 50 or 60 years, literally the country will collapse because there's no workers, there's nobody paying taxes, there's nobody paying into pension programs, healthcare programs. So here's a scenario. Take Japan. By 2030, a third of Japan's population will be over 65. So 1 out of 3 Japanese will be retired. Okay? That means that there's more walkers, like wheelchairs, walkers, than there are strollers.
There's an investment opportunity here.
Think about that. Japan, a third of the people are just old.
Yeah.
And then if you figure there's some middle-aged people and this and that, what you're having is this inverted thing where everybody's old. And there's 1 kid for 6 old people or something. Italy's median age right now is 47. It's about to be 50 for the median age in Italy. In 2040, which is just, 15 years from now, the U.S. is going to hit its oldest ever average age. So there's going to be fewer workers having to pay more in to support the country, taxes, pensions, healthcare. Sure. This isn't slow decline, it's free fall. What you're talking about in a generation or 2. So look at your kids. Your kids are what, in their 30s, 40s?
And 40s, yeah.
Yeah, my kids are in their 30s. By the time our kids retire, there's going to be nobody to support the country. There's going to be no workers, or very few. And if they have kids, by the time their kids grow up, they're just going to be wage slaves to support. You and I will be gone, but this is free fall. And I don't think that people get it. And the overpopulation lie, right, in the 60s, we swallowed this. There's too many mouths. There's not enough food. This guy named Paul Ehrlich predicted that everybody would be starving and be Soylent. Remember Soylent Green?
Yeah.
We'd have to eat Soylent Green. Soylent Green is people by the 1980s, right? Oil was going to run dry. Remember that?
Yeah.
Climate is the boogeyman now, but the data is all flipped. We're basically underpopulated in the West. And it wasn't science that drove all this. It was ideology.
Yeah.
It was an anti-human ideology. That the idea is that we should have fewer humans, a smaller footprint. It would give us a sterile utopia. You tell somebody that fertility is 1.5 right now, they shrug. There's like, oh, so what? I mean, there's too many people anyway. There's too much traffic, too many crowds, too many whatever. Tell them that their grandkids might be the last grandkids, that they won't have great-grandchildren.
Right.
They're going to die and not see children. And no one is going to be able to pay for their kids' retirements. And they blink and go, what are you talking about? Because the programming runs so deep.
Yeah. So Catholicism to the rescue, right? You and I, we did our part, right?
The reason I said 3.5, right, is it has to be 2.3. Between us, we have 7 children.
Right.
You have the lion's share of them.
And I have 5 grandchildren.
Yeah.
I don't know, but that doesn't get my kids up to the average yet. There needs to be a lot more grandchildren.
Well, yeah, look at that.
I need to get on the phone. We got to wrap up here. I got to talk to him. It's a scary thing. Like Mark Stein, the political guy, said, the future belongs to those who show up for it. Are there any countries where the replacement rate is high?
Oh, yeah.
3, 4, 5?
Muslim countries. Yeah, Muslim countries. It's interesting, a couple things about like other countries. Let me just an anecdote about that. You go to, when I've been to parts of Europe, I go to parts of France, go around big cities in France or Germany or whatever, and you'll see every now and then like a French couple, and they've got like this baby stroller, this little expensive baby stroller for
their designer baby.
One designer baby, right? And then as you're just walking around the streets, there's Muslim families pushing multiple strollers with all these kids. And by the way, and this isn't, I'm not trying to be a racist or whatever, I'm just saying that this is all just some math. You know, you go to England right now, you go to France, you go to Germany, these places, and parts of Scandinavia, what you're end up doing is you've got the native people are having one child or on average 1.1 or 0.8 or whatever it is over the average of the population. You look at the Muslim immigrant families, and they're having they average 4, 5, 6, 7 kids. So to that quote you gave from Mark Stein, the future belongs to those who show up for it.
Right.
The future, the math is just the math is the math. They're going to show up for the future, a generation, 2 generations from now, whereas the French and the French Catholics or the German Catholics or whatever, they're just, unless they're not going to be there. They're going to.
Thanks for listening. My name is Greg Smith, and I'm so grateful for my guests, those who leave ratings and reviews on the podcast platforms, and all of you who share the podcast with others. I really love to hear your thoughts, your questions, and your stories. So email me at consideringcatholicism@gmail.com or leave a comment or review on the website at consideringcatholicism.com. This podcast doesn't take ad revenue, and it doesn't make money on clicks. It is 100% supported by donors who believe in this ministry. And to my donors, I want to thank you because you keep me going. You help me cover my costs, and you let me dedicate more time to researching, writing, recording, and editing to get the episodes out to you faster and to engage the community of listeners who send in their questions and comments. I entirely trust the Lord to provide through you. And if you aren't already a supporter, would you consider giving a one-time or recurring donation through the links in the show notes or on the website so this ministry can continue and grow and help others to consider Catholicism? Thank you, and now back to the show.
And you look at other things like, okay, China is interesting. So China had this one child policy, right?
Yeah.
And so China finally wised up and said, this is insane because we're halving the population every generation.
Yeah.
I remember Mark Stein once said, the issue is whether China will get rich before it gets old, before you have a situation where you go, the average age in China is 70, and for every worker, there's 5 or 6 old people, retired people. And you look at some of those cultures as Asian cultures, they don't want the Chinese don't bring in immigrants to replace the workers. Japan isn't going to bring in tons of, South Korea isn't going to start importing half of India or Pakistan to replace the Koreans in those cultures. What you're looking at is serious. And I think one thing about the Chinese thing, just as an anecdote, I was in China, I don't know what that was, maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago one time.
Yep.
And we were out to dinner with, it's a long story, I don't want to tell, but we were out to dinner with this big group of business people and people that I was with and influencers or whatever. And there was a guy who was hosting the dinner. It was a Chinese businessman, like very wealthy Chinese businessman. And he was introducing everybody at this big dinner party at this restaurant to his family. And he had 4 kids. And I leaned over to one of the people that was with us who was from China, like I don't know what you call like a guide for the week or a fixer or whatever, kind of helping us out. And I said, what's the deal? I thought they had a one child policy. He goes, oh, the fine for having, the penalty for having more than one child is you pay a fine of $50,000 per kid. But this guy owns a factory and he just pays the fines.
He just bought them.
But I think they've wised up and they ended the one child policy. But yeah, developed nations have bought into this notion that we have to have smaller families or not reproduce. Because we're going to burn up the planet, or the oil's going to run out, or the food's going to run out, and all this and that. And so it's in developed nations that this collapse is happening, and precisely the places where then they have a lot of overhead, pension plans, healthcare systems. They have complex economies that require workers. You and I were talking about that today at lunch. If I saw a thing with Mike Rowe the other day, and he was saying every year for every 5 tradespeople in America that retire, like 2 tradespeople replace them. And you're going to get to the point where there's nobody to build your house. There's nobody to, wire your house. There's no plumbers. There's no line workers. And you're either going to, and you can't just go make a bunch of new people overnight. Tell everybody start having babies and make a bunch of new people in 2 years. You're going to have to just start having more and more immigration. And for those Americans who are like, why, or you're people in this episode listening, because we have listeners all around the world, are going, why do we keep importing people to our country? You go, because you're not having any of your own. You're not having any kids. And your economy is going to collapse. And your industries are going to collapse. And your pension plans and healthcare systems are going to collapse unless you get more workers in. And if you're not going to have babies, we have to bring in other people who do have babies. But see, that's all focusing on economics. And I think I want to maybe pivot here a little bit to talk about just the psychological void and the cultural void. There was a book, oh man, this book is an old book. I want to say it's 30, 40, 50 years ago or something. I don't remember who wrote it. I remember reading, it was a novel. It was real good. It's called Children of Men. I remember reading the novel. I can't remember. But here's the premise of the novel. It was like a science fiction novel set in the near future, 20 years in the future or something like that. And for some reason, this is the premise of this science fiction novel called Children of Men. For some reason, there was some kind of a global plague or something that killed fertility. And people just stopped being able to have kids. And there was one kid who was like the last child that had been born. And so the whole world was like, there are no more children on the planet, like no more kids. And this one kid who was like the last kid, like the media in this book was like followed him. Because he's a celebrity. He's the world's last child. And I think in the book, he was like 19 years old and he was in Rio or something on a trip, and he gets in a bar fight and gets killed in a bar fight. They go, that was the last child in the world. And it was like, what does psychologically it do to the world where you go, there's no future? And a lot of people are starting to wake up. I read on social media all the time. There's a lot of people that are starting to wake up and go, hey, we went out and we chased careers and we did this and we did that. And we chase dual incomes and all that. And all of a sudden we wake up in our 40s or our 50s and realize there's just nothing. There's no children. There's no grandchildren. And you can go, hey, we can go out, we can have fun, and you can buy stuff and we can travel. But at a certain point, there's a psychological void where you go, there's just nothing to work with. There's nothing to give. There's nothing to leave to the next generation.
Why plant a tree?
Why plant a tree? And you've amassed equity in your house and you've amassed your stock portfolio and all that. And when you die, who are you going to give it to? Government's going to take it. Give it to, I guess, to a nonprofit or something. But there's just nothing to hand off to the next generation. And you're just going to be an old person. And you go, oh, this will be great. I'll just fish and play golf. But at some point, there's just no future. The psychological void. What if life for your family is a dead end? There's no kids. There's no grandkids. Your bloodline just ends. And you think back to your parents and your grandparents and your great-grandparents and this whole Ancestry.com thing, and you go, if you're tracing the family tree, and the family tree just ends. It just ends on you. You work, you buy stuff, and then what? And in Japan, they have some term for it. I can't ever pronounce this thing. Hikikomori or something. It means there's all these shut-ins, old shut-ins in Japan, and they're just in despair. And they have baby dolls like these realistic baby dolls, because there's all these old people in Japan that want to have somebody care for. In America is people doing it with their pets. My wife and I sometimes feel guilty about that because we like really love our dog.
Right.
But you just see a lot of people, they go, the pets become their grandchildren because there's nothing. And you look at depression, right? America is all on antidepressants. And then you look at cultural doom, right? So you look at Britain's fertility rate is 1.56. So they're importing millions of people from the Middle East every day, or not every day, a year.
All the time.
France, 1.83. It leans all on Africa. Go to France and all the cities are just full of Africans.
Yeah.
South Korea, 0.78. They're not going to bring in half of Pakistan to backfill cities like Seoul and all their high-tech industries. By 2100, by the end of this century, Korea won't be Korean.
Yeah, because you need Koreans.
So immigration is a Band-Aid, but it fundamentally, it's a cultural...
Right, the culture of that particular nation will go away.
And see, here's the thing, is when we look at this kind of spiral that you get in, so even if, like right now, if you all turned off the podcast and started making a baby, here's what I want you to do. I want you to push stop on the podcast, and I want you to go right now, within the next hour, I want you to start working on trying to have a baby. Right. So if everybody here turned off your Spotify and just got really busy about having a baby in the next hour, look, the reality is it's going to take 50 years or 60 years of everybody trying to have babies to recover from 50, 60 years of people not having babies. Right. You can't just manufacture millions of people overnight. It just doesn't work that way. The pyramid has flipped upside down. It's not a pyramid. Then it's an expanding pyramid like we were taught to think, where at the top is great-grandma and grandpa, and then the pyramid gets bigger as it goes to the base. Right. It's upside down. So you have your great-great-grandparents, and then it all shrinks down to you, and then beyond you, there's nothing.
Right.
Okay? So this is where the Catholic teaching part comes in, which is it's a vision, I think, for the value of human life.
Yeah.
And human thriving. By the way, we've had 60 million abortions in America in the last 50 years. That's 60 million human lives.
Yeah. Ugh.
But look at, this is not just about contraception, but contraception's a big part of it because contraception helps us to not have kids, but it's even more than that. It's choices, career choices, all these kinds of things. But it's about human flourishing, right?
Yeah.
Families aren't just nice. Families are the basic building unit of society. If you look at Catholic teaching, Christianity 101, right? What came first, the family or the government?
The family.
Adam and Eve. Yeah. And then there was a family. And the thing is that we are not primarily organized by governments. The family is the basic building unit of human society.
Yep.
And they're the backbone. And in fact, Catholic teaching, something we've talked about before, explore again sometime, is subsidiarity, which is the notion that authority and focus in society should be from the bottom up. Issues that can be decided by the family should be decided by the family. Issues can be decided by the village should be decided by the village, by the city, by the county, by the state, by the nation, by the nation, right? Instead of that you have big nation states or leagues of nations like the EU or whatever that sort of hand down dictates to families.
Right.
We've got to flip this script, and we have to put human life and human thriving and human families at the center of, and that's Catholic teaching.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
At some point, it's about having purpose more than prosperity. Because I hear the counter argument: smaller families, family planning, one kid, focus on your career, then get a designer kid when you're in your late 30s. Right. All this kind of stuff allows you to have a more prosperous life. You have a bigger house, nicer cars, better trips, all this kind of stuff. I'm struck by some of the young people that I meet who are like, well, we'll start working on having kids when we get into our late 30s, mid to late 30s, after we first establish our careers, buy nice houses, have good cars, and we want to do a lot of travel.
Yeah.
And it occurs to me that the generation that we grew up in, it was inverted.
Yeah.
You had families, and maybe as you get older, you can start traveling and acquiring things, but you start having family, and they put it the other way around. And so all of a sudden now, maybe when you're 36, you have a baby.
Right.
And then maybe you don't have a second one, or maybe you get one more. But the thing is but you got all your stuff first.
Right.
And here's the thing, that's putting kind of prosperity over purpose in life.
Yeah. I agree.
And you got to have purpose first. Because otherwise, what's the stuff for?
Right.
Secularism gave us wealth, but no heirs.
Right.
Not H-E, how you spell it? H-E-I-R-S?
Yeah.
No one to give our wealth to.
Yeah.
Other than the government. Here's my rant. I've done all the talking here. You take it.
I don't think I have much to add here. There's something really great about watching the next generation come up. We were just out in Arizona hanging out with two of my daughters and their families. And we all took a hike up at a lake. And there was one point where us older folks sat down. We sat down and there was a lake up there. We sat down on the shore, and my kids, my daughter and her husband, who are in their 30s, and their two boys and their daughter, and the boys were skipping stones, and it was just kind of idyllic. And that gave me a lot of pleasure. Another one is, you guys probably, I don't know if the listeners remember, my friend Anthony passed away, and he was 60 years old, but he played in a rock band with a bunch of 30-somethings. And these guys are just full of life, these young guys, right? They're just full of energy. And I've seen them perform, and they're really great guys. In fact, after the funeral, we all sat at a table and talked music war stories, even though I'm double their age. And I've seen these guys play, and they're doing a concert coming up here locally. The band is still ongoing. And it's so much fun to watch the young guys, as a musician, watch the young guys with their guitars and their drums and their whatever up there doing it. That gives me a lot of pleasure. I get as much fun out of watching these guys killing it as I would get up there and doing it myself. There's something to be said for watching all that happen. It's a very life affirming thing.
I've mentioned before, and because you were there, my wife and I led a college ministry for 15 years. And we stopped doing it about 10 years ago. But for the 15 years prior to that, we led a college ministry. And I remember this was like in the early 2000s and the 2010s. And we had, 50, 60, 70 of these college kids any one time in our group. Right. And I remember, again, early 2000s, 2010s, that kind of thing. All these students, and they were super bright and enthusiastic and everything else. And they were like, man, we want to do something radical with our lives. We want to do radical counterculture, change the world. Because they were bright and enthusiastic. And how do we live radical counterculture, change the world lives? And their professors were telling them, you should travel the world and get involved in activist causes and do water projects in Africa and visit Thailand and do internships in Washington, D.C. and do all this kind of radical counterculture stuff. And they would come to the group or they'd come over to our house in the evenings. And I would say, my wife and I would say, you want to be radical, counterculture, change the world, get married, have a ton of babies, and raise them in the church to be followers of Jesus. That's really good. You want to rock the world? You want to do something against the world? Do that.
When we were out in Phoenix just a month ago, my son-in-law is a big hiker and climber, and they live near Mount Camelback in Phoenix, and it's a very popular hiking spot. And it's a tough climb, and I've never been up to the top. And every time I go out there, he says to me, Camelback this year? Come on, you going to do Camelback this year? He just sent me a picture of him and his 3 kids, and they made it to the top. Those kids there's twins that are 9 years old, and one is 7, and they made it all the way up, and they're like, Grandpa. And I feel like that's pulling me up into staying a little younger. If I had just gone out there and we know this really nice restaurant, and after that we're going to go play around the golf, and then that's not what I'm pulled into when I go out there. I'm pulled into a real life affirming thing.
Corey, who's one of the regular guests on this show, Corey and his wife were 2 of those college students in that group. That's how I know Corey. Yeah. He got to know he and his wife when they were college freshmen, and they were in the group that my wife and I led. And we would say those things. The kids would come over to the house for dinner, and then we were like, you want to live a radical counterculture, change the world life, get married, have lots of babies, and raise them to be followers of Jesus. And Corey and his wife, I got to do their wedding, and they're doing it. They're changing the world.
They got busy. What do they have, 4 now?
They're 4 now.
Wow.
Yeah. But they're out there doing it, helping us. So they're doing their part. But we should start paying attention to this, and we should start listening for this kind of anti-human programming that runs through so much of that stuff, because God gave us our lives, and He wants us to live flourishing lives, and He wants us to see the image of God in human life, and to support it in all its forms, and to build strong families that become the backbone of the future, not a future built by government.
It seems to me that you could say it this way, that God being creative and creating things and bringing things to life, and all the explosion of life around us and all the beauty in nature, that's a family trait that He has passed down to us and expects us to participate in.
Absolutely. That's what He means in Genesis. So how does Genesis begin? Is God in Genesis 1, in the first 3 days, He creates spaces. He creates the light from the dark, and the dry land from the heavens above, from the ground, earth below, and the dry land from the sea. And then in the second 3 days, He fills those. He fills them with light, He fills them with fish, He fills them with birds, He fills them with mammals, and ultimately fills them with man. And then He creates man in His image, man and woman in His image, and says, now go and be creators like I am, and sustainers. And we do have a stewardship responsibility to take care of the earth, but we bought into something that having children was bad, and that having it, but by stopping having children, or severely limiting the having of children, that we would create a utopia. And it's not working out that way. Again, be alert for this kind of thing, because you really, if you're our age, you have to build, or whatever age you are, you have to almost overcome a lifetime of programming and start to understand what the demographic collapse and the population implosion really means.
Yeah.
Okay. Hey.
Good stuff.
Good stuff.
Thanks for listening. We'll be back with another episode soon. But before you go, can I quickly ask you to do 5 things? First, please rate the podcast on whatever platform you listen on. That really moves it up in search rankings. Second, please write a review on either Apple Podcasts or on our website, consideringcatholicism.com. That encourages others who are searching for a Catholic podcast to try this one out. Third, please share it with others. Send them a link or post an episode on your social media. Fourth, please write me at consideringcatholicism.com or leave a comment on our website. I'd love to hear your comments, your questions, and your stories. And finally, this podcast is 100% donor supported. My donors keep me going, they help cover my costs, and they let me dedicate more time to researching, writing, recording, and editing to get the episodes out to you faster. So please consider giving a one-time or recurring donation through the links in the show notes or on the website so that this ministry can continue and grow. And never forget, Christus vincit, Christus regnat, and Christus imperat.